After more than a year, the Canada-U.S. border is set to reopen, but only somewhat. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, it appears as though the Americans, it'll be a little easier for them to cross the border, but not so much for us to get to the United States.
Well, not yet. And let me tell you, Hal, my parents are snowbirds. They have been back in Canada since March 2020. They were in Florida when all the COVID lockdowns started to happen. They came back earlier than they wanted to. They didn't want to be back here. They wanted to be in Florida. They wanted to be in Florida over the last winter. And now, like so many Canadians, whether you want to be in Florida or Texas or Arizona or Palm Springs, they're itching to get back. And they were so hopeful for this announcement. And what did we find out? The Americans aren't quite ready to open their border to us yet, but we're willing to open our border to them now. And so, sorry, not quite now. On August 9th, Americans who are fully vaccinated, meaning they've had 2 doses, or the Johnson & Johnson, because they've got Johnson & Johnson, the single-shot vaccine, and you've had 2 weeks since your last shot, you will be allowed into Canada. Children 12 and under traveling with their parents, grandparents, what have you, they will be allowed to enter and not have to quarantine. By the way, for Canadians coming back to Canada, the whole hotel quarantine thing, that goes away. But we're not able to go down to the United States just the same. So it's a very gradual reopening of the border. And in fact, if you remember back to when all of this started, it was travelers other than Americans who were barred first from entering Canada. And then a few days later, it was, we're closing the border to Americans. Now we're opening the border to Americans first on August 9th, and it's not until September 7th that travelers from other countries who are double vaccinated, have the right vaccinations, not ones we don't accept, who will be allowed into the country. So all very much a gradual and slow-moving process as far as getting back to some sort of normal when it comes to travel.
Now, as the border is slowly reopening, Brian, a strike could potentially grind any progress to a halt. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, this is going to be strange. So the 8,500 members of the Canada Border Services Agency Union they've been in a strike position for some time. They haven't had a contract, believe it or not, Hal. They haven't had a contract since June or July 2018. So it's already been 3 years without a contract. They worked all through COVID without a contract, but now they're saying, you know what? There's a few things we want. We want to make sure that wages are looked after, but also safety is looked after. Non-uniform members that don't have to be at the border, are they able to work from home? Things like that. So apparently CBSA officers getting a lot more abuse than they used to at the border. That's something that they want to deal with. So these people could be going on strike in early August, just about the same time as the Canada-U.S. border is somewhat, but not fully reopening. So that could change absolutely everything when it comes to being able to go across the border to, well, I was hoping to go across the border to a Bills game, say in September. Not sure that'll happen yet. But, for Americans coming here, a lot of border communities rely on tourism. They rely on the people coming across the shop. All of that could be put at risk by this strike action.
Yeah, we have the same thing here with Montana, Coots border crossing. A lot of those border businesses, you're right, rely heavily on those tourist dollars. Brian, as for a potential fall election, the Prime Minister did his sprint here in the West. We saw him here, then jetted off to Quebec for some funding announcements. Now Trudeau is pushing some money into Ontario. Brian, you think a campaign is unofficially underway, but that our Prime Minister should make it official so that taxpayers are not paying for his re-election?
Well, do you remember in 2015, I believe the date was August 2nd, 2015, Stephen Harper said, I'm calling an election right now, and voting day will be October 19th. People said, oh, this is crazy. This is a 78-day campaign. This is the longest election campaign ever. Well, guess what? We're in the middle. Stephen Harper said he was calling that because he wanted to put everyone on an equal footing, Hal. He said, there's no sense having the government being able to campaign with taxpayer dollars and the opposition being out there somewhat with taxpayer dollars campaigning. He said, let's put everyone on the same footing. Let's call the election now. We all know when voting day will be, and people can make up their minds. Didn't work out too well for Stephen Harper in 2015. Right now, Justin Trudeau is going across the country. As you said, he did the sprint across the West, the transit funding in Calgary, the transit funding in Surrey, British Columbia, the daycare funding in BC, the daycare funding in Nova Scotia, funding for Pratt and Whitney Aerospace in Montreal. This week, campaign announcements in Brampton, in Hamilton, and the list goes on. The guy is campaigning on our dime. He's flying across the country, making government spending announcements. He's writing checks that he doesn't have to cash while still sitting in the government chair. So the opposition parties are not on the same footing as the government, and we are in the middle of an election campaign. This is the type of thing where we should, every party should be on the same footing. We should all be looking at them in the same way. Don't tell me that we're not in the middle of an election campaign when Justin Trudeau is campaigning like this. It's going to go on for days and days. And if you backtrack it from when the election's expected, sometime around September 14th or so, you backtrack it to when he actually started campaigning, guess what? You end up with the same length of campaign as Stephen Harper in 2015. It's just that Justin Trudeau will spend half of that campaign time on your dime instead of his.
Now, Brian, if we do in fact head to the polls this fall, some political pundits say Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives could win fewer seats than they did in 2019. But you don't buy that. In fact, you believe the Tories have a shot at winning.
Well, they do. I mean, it depends on which set of polls you're looking at. There's, I don't want to say that, well, there's this one poll that I really like and it shows the Conservatives are winning. No, there's two camps. There's a couple of camps, or, several polls that show that the Liberals have a double-digit lead. And then there are several polls that show that it's between 2 and 3 points. So there's not a convergence of the pollsters yet, which tells me that the electorate is fluid. So Aaron O'Toole started out the 2017 leadership race, to replace Stephen Harper. He finished in third place behind Maxime Bernier and Andrew Scheer, who actually won the event. Aaron O'Toole started out that campaign as a nobody, where no one knew who he was, where his communications teams would get calls saying, when is she available for an interview? Because they thought that Aaron O'Toole was a woman. And he finished third. So he was slow and steady, almost won the race. In the 2020 campaign, he was slow and steady, won the race because he wasn't expected to win, and yet he did. So, if the polls that show it's a 2 to 3 point difference between Aaron O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, could he actually win? Absolutely. We're going to have to wait and see. Look, I've been around this game long enough to tell you that campaigns matter, and anyone that tells you on the start of, day one of an election campaign, anyone that tells you who's going to win at the end, well, they're not very smart, they haven't been around long, and they're not paying attention to what's happened in the past.
Well, let's talk about something that could potentially hurt our Prime Minister heading into a potential election. The Ethics Commissioner says another investigation has been launched against Trudeau. Now, this one involves another claim of conflict of interest. Can you explain, and will this really have any impact of the Liberals being re-elected?
Well, at this point, it's an investigation into whether they should launch an investigation, which, Hal, find me what the difference is. But Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion responded to a letter from Conservative MP Michael Barrett, who said, look, we're a little concerned about the contracts handed out to Tom Pitfield. I almost said Michael Pitfield, handed out to Tom Pitfield, who is a childhood friend of Justin Trudeau. Now, Tom Pitfield's father, Michael Pitfield, was both a former Liberal senator, but before that was the clerk of the Privy Council for Pierre Trudeau. So the two men grew up together. Tom Pitfield was in Justin Trudeau's wedding party. They both took part in that, vacation to the Aga Khan's private island, the one that got Trudeau in trouble with the Ethics Commissioner. He's also the guy that the Liberals turn to for digital strategy when it comes to using big data to try and target voters when it comes to elections. His company, in between elections, gets contracts to help MPs manage big data. So there are questions about whether the prime minister is using his influence to sign up 97% of the Liberal caucus, or 149 MPs, to pay a contract towards Tom Pitfield's firm. We don't know what it's going to be, but in about a week to 10 days, we'll find out what the ethics commissioner decides on whether he will launch a full investigation or not. Will this hurt him? It's tough to say. Look, the Aga Khan's Island hurt him a little bit. The Wee scandal hurt him a little bit. All of these things hurt him a little bit. If you end up with a narrative that Justin Trudeau can't be trusted because he has ethics problems, that could help bring him down. You know, Paul Martin won a minority government in 2004, even though the sponsorship scandal was going on. But eventually things built and built and built, and eventually Stephen Harper was able to beat him, partly due to ethics concerns. People will eventually say, you know what, I've had enough of this. They're willing to put up with a certain amount, but not enough. We'll have to wait until voting day to find out where the public actually is.
There's been quite a bit of speculation that former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney will be running for the Liberal Party if there is a fall election, but Carney says his previous commitments will not allow him to run. Tell me more.
Oh, we've been speculating about where Mark Carney is going to run. When Catherine McKenna, the former infrastructure and environment minister, said she won't seek re-election, everyone said, well, Mark Carney's going to run in Ottawa Centre. And then there was speculation that David McGuinty, longtime Liberal MP, I think he was first elected in 2004, that he would be given a diplomatic appointment so that Mark Carney could run. And so there's all this speculation, and eventually it became, where won't Mark Carney run? Mark Carney's going to run because he's the future of the Liberal Party. He had to come out with a statement and say, if there's an election before the end of October, early November, I'm not running. He has said that he's fully in support of the Liberal government. Now, remember, this is a guy who worked closely with Jim Flaherty, who was finance minister at the time, and Stephen Harper, who was prime minister at the time, all through the 2008-2009 financial crisis. He helped lead global initiatives in steadying the banking system worldwide. So he's not a guy without some credentials. But while he was working with conservatives back then, he has pledged his allegiance to the Liberals now, and yet says, if they call an election too soon, I won't be running. So a lot of people looked at Mark Carney as the next leader of the Liberal Party. He has now counted himself out, and most of the betting money is on an election call between August 8th and August 16th, Hal, in terms of when an election will be called. Nova Scotians go to the polls on August 17th, so Justin Trudeau just has that 1 week window where he has to have some overlap, and other than that, he's free and clear to call an election with voting day sometime in September.
Now, Brian, let's talk about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statements on residential schools. You say he tries to blame other people, and this week he said he would welcome a criminal investigation into what happened at those schools. Now, from what I recall, his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was Prime Minister at the time the residential school crisis was at its peak.
His father oversaw the opening of 7 schools while he was Prime Minister. There were some schools opened while he was in government, but not Prime Minister. But 7 schools were opened while he was Prime Minister. None of them, by the way, affiliated with religious organizations, but because by that time, they had abandoned working with the Anglican Church or the Presbyterian/United Church or the Catholic Church. They had decided that no, the government will run these schools. So 7 schools opened between 1968, when Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister, and 1976, just before Justin Trudeau and I started kindergarten. That always, hits me, Hal, because were I born to another family, I could have been going to one of these schools. Justin Trudeau, born to another family, could have been going to one of these schools. This is something that he should be considering. Instead, he keeps using these announcements, these statements, to try and shift blame to others when the ultimate blame lays with the federal government of Canada, which for most of the time, my colleague Laurie Goldstein at the Toronto Sun calculated the numbers, and at 68% of the time that residential schools were open, Liberals were in charge. But he keeps trying to put it off on conservatives with Sir John A. Macdonald or with the Catholic Church, which is his latest thing. The federal government was the one that mandated these and then contracted the churches, be it Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, United, whatever. They contracted them to run them with underfunding, which is something that we knew about back in 1907, and the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier refused to fix it.
Brian, we only have about a moment left here, but quickly, the Trudeau Liberals announced that Inuit leader Mary Simon would be our next Governor General. She's scheduled to be installed next Monday, but there have been more than 400 complaints against her because she doesn't speak French against her appointment.
Yeah, so the official languages commissioner, Raymond Théberge, has said that he's going to look into this. All he can do is investigate the Privy Council office. He can't investigate the Governor General. He can't investigate the Queen because he has no authority over the Queen or over the Governor General. So it's kind of a fishing expedition. It's kind of a looking to see, can we blame somebody for something? But look, the official languages commissioner, like the official languages committee in the House of Commons, is really the French languages commissioner and the French languages committee. This is not about making sure that there's bilingualism. And all these attempts to say that you must speak English and French really are about excluding people who are not in the Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa triangle. And if you're not in that, you don't deserve to get any appointment, be it Governor General, Supreme Court, or anything else. That's what these appointments and that's what these rules are all about. So this won't go anywhere, but it will appease some people in Quebec.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal.